So did local motors actually know what the problem was before they opened the community challenge, or sometimes did they find out what the problem was as they went along?
We'd like to think we did, but to your point, Oliver, in the nature of how you asked the question, it's a really good observation to know that sometimes you don't know all of the problem right off the bat. And what would happen there is we would have these various different sessions with the community, whether they be live or we would just start to pick it up through the chat of what was happening online and say, oh, there's some ambiguity in this brief that the community called out before we did. And they're actually bringing some really good information to the table with regards to gaps in our own understanding and research. We need to backfill. And then we would redo the brief. And this happened a few times where we would go, hey, community, you're right. You guys called out some really good points. You have some deeper perspective in some of these things. We will adjust the brief. Make sure that everyone knows we're now operating on brief version 1.4 or something like that. Now, that wasn't often because when working with other companies, usually they're bringing a pretty well-defined problem statement to us, whereas some of the ones that we did for ourselves, we were willing to be more open to learn and develop that problem statement and thus the creative brief through those back and forth online processes.
Yeah, like co-creating the brief with the community before you ever co-create a product.
Absolutely.
They're going to see around corners that we're not seeing.
So a good example would be the urban mobility project that we did with Berlin 2030 was the idea, right? We were doing all this research on what is mobility going to look like in the future with regards to automation, electrification, and all that stuff. And we were doing this in 2015, right? So EVs weren't even a part of the main conversation in mobility quite yet. They had been introduced, but they weren't mainstream.
And urban mobility, Nemo, just being like, okay, how do you set up a city in such a way that supports large populations and getting people around without clogging up the streets, without a bunch of privately owned vehicles taking most of the burden? Is that a good?
I mean, simply put, is trying to rebuild our cities for people and not cars, right? And in American cities, that's still a pretty major issue, and it's a massive talking point with regard to mobility in North America. In Europe, they were willing to adapt that conversation much earlier on, which is why we picked Berlin as a good example for that specific challenge. Even in 2015, their public transportation, bike infrastructure, things like that, alternative mobility was already pretty good, right? So using them as kind of the, let's say, the poster child for the things, the ways we wanted to think. But what other problems does Berlin have that could still be solved to make this even better? What I think was a really, really good choice. But we came to that via conversations during the research phase with the community. We put out a sub challenge, an early thing that said, where are you from? What are the mobility challenges of your part of the world that you think need to be solved? And it was really compelling. Hearing things from people from Singapore, from India. We even had some Central Sub-Saharan African people in our community that had some really, really interesting sort of early infrastructure development challenges that were really, really interesting. Of course, North America, but South America as well. So a full global perspective before we even had our problem statement and creative brief to run the challenge. And it was extremely eye-opening as to what we could cross-reference that we all experience, and then what are the unique problems in various different areas. It was really, really cool.